There is a specific sound a credit card terminal makes when it rejects you. It is not just a beep. It is a low, guttural buzz that seems to vibrate through your fingertips and straight into your chest. I stood there, staring at the little screen that flashed declined, in bright red letters, feeling the heat rise up the back of my neck. I was at the grocery store, specifically the one on 4th Street where I have been shopping for 20 years. The cashier, a sweet girl named Brenda who usually asks about my garden, looked at me with that pitying expression people reserve for the elderly or the destitute. Behind me, a man in a suit sighed loudly, checking his watch. I could practically feel his impatience radiating against my back like a physical shove. I smiled weakly at Brenda and told her there must be a mistake. I told her to run it again. I knew there was money in that account. There was always money in that account. My husband, Richard, had set up the family trust specifically so I would never have to experience a moment like this. He wanted me to be secure. He wanted me to be safe. Brenda ran the card again. The same low buzz followed. The silence that stretched between us after that second rejection was louder than the store's announcements over the intercom. I had to do the walk of shame. I had to leave my cart full of groceries, milk, eggs, a rotisserie chicken, and a bottle of vitamins, right there at the register. I mumbled something about calling my bank and walked out to the parking lot, my hands shaking so hard I could barely find my car keys in my purse. I sat in the driver's seat of my sedan, the engine off, and took a deep breath. I am 68 years old. I am not senile. I'm not confused. I balance my checkbook down to the penny every single Sunday morning with a cup of coffee. I know what is in my accounts. Or at least I thought I did. Before I tell you exactly what I found out when I dialed the bank, I want to ask a small favor. I love seeing who is listening to these stories. Go ahead and pause the video for just a quick second and drop a comment down below. Let me know what time it is where you are right now and maybe what city or country you are tuning in from. It is always fascinating to see how far these stories travel. Hey, are you back? Let's get into the nightmare. I pulled out my phone and dialed the number on the back of my card. I expected to hear a recording about fraud protection or maybe a system error. Instead, I got transferred 3 times until I ended up on the line with a senior account manager. He sounded uncomfortable. That was my first clue that this wasn't a computer glitch. Banks love glitches. They are easy to fix. They hate legal drama. He told me in a voice that was far too polite that my access to the primary checking account and the attached credit lines had been suspended. I asked him why. I demanded to know who authorized it. I am the primary beneficiary of the trust. It is my money. Richard left it for me. The manager cleared his throat and said the words that made my blood run cold. He said the trustees had invoked a competency clause. They had filed an emergency petition stating that I was showing signs of financial mismanagement and cognitive decline. They had frozen the liquid assets for my own protection until a formal review could be conducted. The trustees. My stomach dropped through the floorboards of the car. There were only 2 other trustees on that account besides me. My daughter, Emily, and my son, Nathan. They were the only ones with the power to do this. My own children had locked me out of my life. I hung up the phone and stared at the steering wheel. I didn't cry. Not yet. I was too stunned to cry. It felt like someone had hit me in the face with a shovel. I immediately opened my text messages. There was nothing from Nathan. He avoids conflict like the plague. But there was a message from Emily sent 20 minutes ago, while I was likely standing in line at the checkout counter. It was long, patronizing, and infuriating. It started with, "Mom, please don't freak out." That is always how they start when they are about to ruin your day. The text went on to say that she and Nathan had been worried about my spending lately. She mentioned a donation I made to a local animal shelter last month. $500, as if I had gambled away the deed to the house. She said they spoke to a lawyer and decided it was best to limit my exposure, so I wouldn't be taken advantage of by scammers. Limit my exposure? I am a retired accountant. I worked for 30 years managing payroll for a mid-sized logistics firm. I know how to spot a scam. I know how to manage a budget. This wasn't about protecting me. This was about control. They had cut off my cards, my cash flow, and my dignity with a single email to the bank. They didn't even have the decency to come to my house and tell me to my face. They let me find out by having a teenage cashier decline my transaction for a $5 rotisserie chicken. I drove home in a daze. My house, usually my sanctuary, felt different when I walked inside. It felt vulnerable. If they could freeze the bank accounts, what else could they do? Could they take the car? Could they force me into a home? The silence of the living room pressed in on me. I sat down on the sofa, the same sofa Richard and I bought 10 years ago, and I felt a surge of panic that I had never experienced before. I was alone. Richard was gone. And the two people who were supposed to be my support system, the children I raised and loved and sacrificed for, had just declared war on me. They framed it as love, they framed it as concern, but I knew exactly what it was. It was a blockade. They were starving me out. But what Emily and Nathan didn't realize was that their mother wasn't just a helpless old lady. I might be 68 and I might have been blindsided, but I wasn't broken. Not yet. I looked at the photo of them on the mantel, smiling at their college graduations, and for the first time in my life I didn't see my babies. I saw adversaries. And I needed to figure out my next move before the lights got turned off. To understand why that declined card at the grocery store hurt so much, you have to understand who I am and who my children used to be. My name is Chloe. I'm not a tycoon or a celebrity. I am just a woman who worked hard alongside her husband for 40 years to build a comfortable life. Richard started a construction supply business in the 80s and I ran the books. We were a team. We scrimped and saved, driving used cars and skipping vacations so that we could funnel everything into the business and into our children's futures. We weren't flashy people. We believed in stability. When Richard passed away 3 years ago from a sudden heart attack, my entire world tilted on its axis. He was the loud one, the one who filled the room. I was the quiet organizer in the background. Without him, the house felt too big and the silence was deafening. But I managed. I joined a book club. I expanded my vegetable garden. I learned how to fix the leaky faucet in the guest bathroom by watching videos on the internet. I was doing okay. Then there are my children. Emily is 42 and Nathan is 38. Somewhere along the line, the dynamic shifted. I suspect it started right after Richard's funeral. I remember sitting in the living room, still wearing my black dress, staring at the casseroles the neighbors had brought over. Emily sat down next to me, put her hand on my knee, and instead of asking how I was feeling, she asked if I knew where Dad kept the life insurance policies. It was subtle, wrapped in that tone of, "I'm just trying to help you get organized." But it stung. I brushed it off then. I told myself she was just being practical. Emily has always been the type A personality, a real estate agent who lives and dies by her daily planner. She treats every interaction like a negotiation she needs to win. Nathan is different. He is the baby of the family, and frankly, Richard and I might have coddled him too much. He bounces between startup ideas that never launch and asks for loans he forgets to pay back. He is easily swayed, especially by his older sister. If Emily says the sky is green, Nathan will nod and ask what shade of emerald. Over the last 3 years, their concern for me started to feel more like an audit. They stopped coming over for Sunday dinner to eat roast beef and catch up. Instead, they came over to scan the room for new purchases. If I bought a new throw pillow, Emily would raise an eyebrow and ask if I really needed it. If I hired a landscaper to help with the heavy lifting in the yard because my back was aching, Nathan would make a comment about how I was burning through my savings. They treated the family trust not as my safety net, but as their future lottery win that I was slowly spending. They never said it outright, of course. It was always phrased as concern for my cognitive health. "Mom, are you sure you're tracking these expenses?" Or, "Mom, maybe we should take over the bills so you don't have to worry." I always refused. I told them I was perfectly capable. I reminded them that I was an accountant for decades. I can balance a ledger in my sleep. But they would just exchange these knowing glances like I was a toddler insisting I could tie my own shoes while tripping over the laces. The tension really ramped up about 6 months ago. I decided to take a trip with my sister to Italy. It was something Richard and I had always talked about doing but never got around to. I booked it. It wasn't an extravagant trip. We were staying in small B&Bs and flying economy, but when I mentioned it to the kids, you would have thought I announced I was joining a circus. Emily came over the next day with a folder of printouts about scams targeting seniors abroad, and lectured me for an hour about how irresponsible it was to spend that kind of money on a frivolous vacation at my age. She used that word, frivolous. It made my blood boil. I worked for 40 years. I raised them. I paid for their colleges. And now, spending my own money to see Rome was considered frivolous? I went on the trip anyway. I had a wonderful time. But when I came back, the atmosphere had changed. The phone calls became less frequent but more probing. They started asking about my passwords. They wanted to know the name of my attorney. I thought they were just being their usual annoying selves, escalating their hovering because I had defied them by going to Italy. I didn't realize they were building a case. I didn't realize that every time I forgot where I put my glasses, which happens to everyone regardless of age, they were mentally filing it away as evidence of decline. Every time I complained about technology moving too fast, they marked it down as incompetence. Looking back, I was so naive. I thought they were just annoying, entitled brats who would eventually grow up. I didn't think they were capable of malice. I certainly didn't think they would weaponize the legal system against their own mother. But as I sat in my car outside that grocery store, recalling the hum of the decline transaction, the pieces fell into place. The concern wasn't love. The visits weren't for company. They were surveillance. They had been watching me, waiting for a moment of weakness or just manufacturing one so they could swoop in and seize the controls. They didn't want a mother. They wanted a bank vault that stayed shut until I died. And now, with my card declined and my access frozen, they had finally managed to spin the lock. I got back to the house and went straight to the computer in the den. My hands were shaking so bad I mistyped my password 3 times. When I finally got it right, the screen didn't show my balance. It didn't show my transaction history. It just showed a stark white box with bold black text. Account access restricted. Please contact your administrator. I stared at it, feeling the bile rise in my throat. Administrator. That was a fancy word for my children. I tried my personal savings account next. The one I kept separate from the main trust for things like Christmas gifts and that trip to Italy. Blocked. I tried the credit card portal. Blocked. It was a clean sweep. They hadn't just frozen the trust. They had frozen me. I went to the kitchen drawer where I keep an emergency envelope. Richard always told me to keep $500 in cash, just in case of a hurricane or a power outage. I pulled the envelope out from under the stack of takeout menus. It was light. Too light. I opened it and found empty air. Then I remembered. 2 weeks ago Nathan had come over. He said he needed cash for a tow truck because his car had broken down in my driveway and the driver only took cash. I had given him the envelope and he had promised to pay me back the next day via Venmo. He never did. At the time I didn't think much of it, just Nathan being Nathan. Now looking at that empty envelope, I wondered if it was part of the plan. Drain the liquid cash first, then slam the digital doors shut. I had $40 in my wallet and half a tank of gas. That was it. I picked up the phone and called Emily. This time I wasn't going to leave a polite voicemail. I called her cell, her work line, and her husband's phone until she finally picked up. She didn't sound guilty. She sounded annoyed, like I was a telemarketer interrupting her dinner. Mom, I told you to wait for us to call you, she said. Her voice had that sharp, clipping tone she uses when she's closing a real estate deal. You cut off my money, Emily, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I was at the store. My card was declined. Do you have any idea how humiliating that was? I had to leave my groceries on the counter. See? This is exactly what we were worried about, she sighed, and I could hear her typing something in the background. You're getting emotional and irrational. We did this to protect you, Mom. We reviewed the accounts. That trip to Italy? The donation to the dog shelter? You're hemorrhaging money. If we didn't step in, you'd be destitute in 5 years. I spent $4,000 on a trip I waited 40 years to take. I shouted. I couldn't help it. And the donation was $500. I have hundreds of thousands in that trust, Emily. I am not hemorrhaging anything. It starts small, she said, her voice dropping to that patronizing whisper. Nathan and I consulted with a specialist. It's called pre-dementia financial recklessness. We filed an emergency petition this morning. The judge granted a temporary hold based on our affidavit. We are the acting conservators of your estate now. Conservators. The word hung in the air like toxic smoke. That is what you do for someone who is in a coma, or someone who has completely lost their grip on reality. Not for a woman who balances her own checkbook and does the New York Times crossword puzzle in pen. I will fight this, I hissed. I will hire a lawyer and I will sue you both for every penny. With what money? Emily asked. It wasn't a taunt. It was a cold statement of fact. Your accounts are frozen, Mom. You can't write a check for a retainer. You can't use your credit cards. And don't worry, we'll set up a stipend for you. Nathan is going to bring over a prepaid debit card tomorrow with $200 on it for groceries. We'll review your needs on a weekly basis. She hung up before I could scream. Stipend. $200. Like I was a teenager being grounded. I sat there holding the dead phone, realizing the brilliance of their trap. To fight a legal battle you need money. To get my money back I needed a lawyer. But I couldn't pay a lawyer because they had my money. It was a perfect vicious circle. An hour later a courier van pulled up to the curb. A man walked up the driveway and handed me a thick manila envelope. I signed for it, my signature looking jagged and angry. I opened it on the porch. It was the official legal notice. Petition for emergency conservatorship. I skimmed the pages, my eyes blurring with tears of rage. They had lied. The affidavit claimed I had forgotten to pay utility bills. A lie, I have autopay. That I was sending large sums to unknown internet recipients, the animal shelter. And that I had appeared confused and disoriented in public. They had twisted my life into a narrative of decline. Every quirk, every generous act, every moment of forgetfulness was weaponized in black and white text. And the worst part? They had used my own money to pay the lawyer who drafted this against me. The trust covered legal fees for the trustees. They were suing me with my husband's legacy. The sun began to set, casting long shadows across the living room. I didn't turn on the lights. I was afraid to use the electricity, wondering if they would see a spike in the bill and cut that off too. I felt small. I felt erased. For the first time since Richard died, I felt truly unsafe in my own home. I was trapped in a house I owned, surrounded by things I had bought, but I was a prisoner. The silence wasn't peaceful anymore. It was heavy. Then my stomach grumbled. I hadn't eaten since breakfast. I thought about the rotisserie chicken I had left on the conveyor belt at the store. Brenda had probably put it back in the warmer, or maybe someone else had bought it. I went to the kitchen and opened the pantry. Can of soup. A box of crackers. That was dinner. As I ate my cold soup, I didn't even want to wait for the microwave. I looked at the pile of mail on the counter. Buried under the courier envelope was a letter from the bank that must have arrived yesterday, but I had been too distracted to open it. It wasn't from the local branch. It was from the main administrative office downtown. I almost threw it away, thinking it was just another notification of the freeze. But the return address caught my eye. It was from the office of Mr. Henderson. Not a doctor, but the senior trust administrator who had worked with Richard years ago. I slit the envelope open with my thumb. It wasn't a notice of the freeze. It was a request for a meeting. A meeting that had been scheduled for tomorrow morning, initiated by him, not my children. The letter was dated 3 days ago, before the freeze went into effect. Why did the head of the trust want to see me right before my children dropped the hammer? My heart started to thump a different rhythm. It wasn't fear anymore. It was curiosity. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in the center of my big empty bed, staring at the ceiling fan slicing through the darkness. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the declined message on that card reader. I saw Emily's smug face. I heard Nathan's excuses. The anxiety in my chest was a physical weight, like a stone sitting right on top of my heart. I kept doing the math in my head. I had $40 cash. Half a tank of gas. A pantry full of canned soup. If I didn't drive anywhere, didn't turn on the heat, and ate like a bird, I could maybe last a week before I had to beg. And that was exactly what they wanted. They wanted me to crawl to them asking for permission to buy toothpaste. The sun came up, gray and unforgiving. I dragged myself out of bed and went to the kitchen to make coffee, only to realize I was out of milk. I drank it black, the bitter taste matching my mood. I was staring at the letter from Mr. Henderson's office, the one I found last night, debating whether I even had enough gas to drive downtown to see him. What was the point? If he was the trust administrator, he was probably just going to deliver the final blow in person. He was probably going to hand me a budget sheet drawn up by Emily and tell me to be a good girl and stick to it. Then the phone rang. It was the landline, the old heavy unit on the kitchen wall that Richard refused to get rid of. I stared at it. I let it ring 3 times. I assumed it was Nathan calling to see if I was ready to accept my allowance debit card. I almost ripped the cord out of the wall. But something, maybe instinct, maybe a lingering hope from that letter, made me pick it up. Hello. My voice sounded cracked and tired. Mrs. Dawson? This is Arthur Henderson. I'm calling from the Trust Administration Office. His voice was gravelly and serious. Arthur Henderson. He was a contemporary of Richard's, A man who wore three-piece suits even in July. He wasn't the type to make casual morning calls. "Mr. Henderson," I said, gripping the counter. "If you're calling to tell me about the freeze, I know. My children have made it very clear that I am incompetent." There was a pause on the other end. A long, heavy silence. Then I heard the rustling of papers. "That is actually why I am calling you personally, Chloe," he said, dropping the formalities. "I received the emergency petition your children filed yesterday. They cited the competency clause in the 2018 trust addendum. It triggered an automatic lock on the liquid assets. Standard procedure." "I know," I whispered, tears pricking my eyes again. "I can't buy groceries, Arthur. They cut me off." "Yes, well," Arthur cleared his throat, and his tone shifted from professional to something sharper, almost angry. "When that petition hit my desk, it didn't sit right with me. I've known you for 30 years. The allegations in their affidavit, they seemed inconsistent with the woman I know. So I went down to the physical archives last night. I didn't look at the digital files your children's lawyer is seeing. I went to the fireproof safe where Richard kept the original wet ink documents." My heart hammered against my ribs. "What are you saying?" "Richard was a shrewd man, Chloe. He loved his children, but he knew them. He knew Emily was controlling, and he knew Nathan was weak." Arthur's voice softened. "Do you remember coming into the office about 5 years ago? Just after Richard's first health scare? You signed a stack of papers a mile high." I racked my brain. That time was a blur of hospital visits and fear. "I think so. We signed so many things." "One of those documents was a directive of sole authority," Arthur said, pronouncing every word with distinct clarity. "It's a sleeper clause. It states that in the event of any challenge to your competency or any attempt by secondary trustees to restrict your access, this document activates. It explicitly overrides the competency clause unless 2 independent court-appointed psychiatrists declare you unfit. Not a petition from your kids. Not a note from their lawyer. 2 court doctors." I gripped the phone so hard my knuckles turned white. "What does that mean, Arthur?" "It means," he said, and I could practically hear him smiling on the other end, "that the petition they filed is barely worth the paper it is printed on. But here's the kicker. This directive also contains a bad faith provision. It says that if any beneficiary attempts to restrict the primary trustee's access without valid medical proof, they automatically forfeit their status as active trustees. They are demoted to silent beneficiaries with 0 voting power." The room seemed to spin, but in a good way. Like the moment the roller coaster crests the hill and you see the horizon. "So, I have control?" I asked, my voice trembling. "You don't just have control, ma'am," Arthur said, emphasizing the title with a deep respect. "You have the nuclear codes. As of this morning, when I filed this document with the court clerk to update the record, your children have no authority over the trust. None. They can't freeze a dime. In fact, because they triggered the bad faith provision, you now have the sole discretion to suspend their monthly dividends if you deem their behavior detrimental to the estate." I let out a breath I felt like I had been holding for 24 hours. The relief was so intense it made my knees buckle. I slid down the kitchen cabinets until I was sitting on the cool linoleum floor, the phone cord stretched tight above me. Richard. My wonderful, paranoid, brilliant Richard. He had seen this coming. He had planted a landmine in the paperwork, knowing that if the kids ever got greedy they would step right on it. "They don't know yet, do they?" I asked. "No," Arthur said. "I wanted to call you first. Their lawyer is expecting a conference call at noon to finalize the stipend arrangement. I suspect Emily and Nathan will be there, expecting to dictate terms to you." "They are coming over at noon," I confirmed, looking at the clock. It was 9 a.m. "They want to bring me a debit card." "Well," Arthur said, his voice dry and crisp, "I can call them now and ruin the surprise. Or, I can patch into a speakerphone call when they arrive, and we can explain the new reality to them together." A fire lit up in my belly. A hot, righteous flame that burned away the shame of the grocery store and the fear of the dark house. I thought about Emily's condescending text messages. I thought about Nathan stealing my emergency cash. I wiped the tears from my face and stood up. "Don't call them yet, Arthur," I said, my voice steady and strong. "Let them come over. Let them think they won. I want to see their faces when the check bounces." Arthur chuckled. "I'll have my phone ready. Call me when they sit down. And Chloe? Go buy yourself a steak tonight. The freeze is lifted on my end. Your card will work in about 10 minutes. I hung up the phone and looked around my kitchen. It didn't look like a prison anymore. It looked like a courtroom. I had 3 hours to get ready. I went upstairs, showered, and put on my best outfit, the silk blouse and tailored slacks I used to wear to board meetings. I put on my pearls. I put on my red lipstick. I wasn't a confused old lady anymore. I was the CEO of this family, and I was about to fire the board of directors. At exactly 11:58 a.m., a silver SUV pulled into my driveway. I watched from the living room window, standing just behind the curtain so they wouldn't see me. Emily was driving, of course. Nathan was in the passenger seat looking down at his phone. They sat there for a moment before getting out, likely rehearsing their lines. Be firm but gentle. Don't let her guilt trip you. It's for her own good. I could practically hear the script Emily had written for them. They walked up the path and I didn't wait for them to knock. I opened the door just as Emily reached for the handle. The look on their faces was priceless. They were expecting to find me in my bathrobe, maybe crying, maybe surrounded by piles of unopened mail. Instead, I was standing there in my silk blouse, spine straight, with the smell of fresh coffee wafting from the kitchen. Mom, Emily said, blinking rapidly. She recovered quickly, putting on her sympathetic nurse face. It's nice. We were worried you might be having a hard morning. I'm having a very interesting morning, I said, stepping aside to let them in. Come sit down. They walked into the living room. Nathan wouldn't meet my eyes. He sat on the edge of the sofa, wringing his hands. Emily, however, marched to the coffee table and placed a small plastic card on it with a definitive click. It was a generic prepaid Visa card. The kind you buy at a drugstore for a teenager's birthday. Okay, Mom, Emily started, clasping her hands. We know you're upset about the accounts. But Nathan and I have set this up for you. There is $200 on here. That should cover groceries for the week. If you need anything else, prescriptions, gas, you just text us a photo of the receipt and we will approve the funds. It's a simple system. Simple, I repeated, looking at the card. And I suppose you've already transferred the rest of the liquid cash into an account you control? It's in a holding trust, Nathan mumbled, finally speaking up. Just until the competency review is done. We didn't want you to, accidentally spend it. Like I spent it on a trip to Italy? Asked my voice low. Exactly, Emily snapped, losing her patience. Mom, you aren't listening. You aren't capable of managing this anymore. We are the trustees. We make the decisions. This is how it works now. I looked at them. Really looked at them. I saw the greed masked as concern. I saw the entitlement. And I realized that Richard was right. He had protected me from this exact moment. Actually, I said, picking up my cell phone from the side table. I think we should get a second opinion on how it works. I dialed Arthur. He picked up on the first ring. I put him on speaker and set the phone right next to that cheap plastic debit card. Mr. Henderson? I said. They are here. Good afternoon. Arthur's voice boomed through the speaker, crisp and authoritative. Hello, Emily. Hello, Nathan. Mr. Henderson? Emily frowned, looking confused. Why is the trust administrator on the phone? We already sent the legal notice to your office. We don't need to discuss this. We very much do, Arthur said. You see, I am looking at a document your father signed in 2018. It is titled the Directive of Sole Authority. Are you familiar with it? Silence. Emily looked at Nathan. Nathan shrugged, looking terrified. I didn't think so, Arthur continued. It effectively states that if any secondary beneficiary attempts to restrict the primary beneficiary's access without two independent medical evaluations declaring incapacitation, it triggers an immediate override. That's not possible, Emily stammered, her face flushing red. Our lawyer said. Your lawyer saw the standard contract, Arthur interrupted, his voice hardening. He didn't see the private addendum kept in the physical vault. By filing that emergency petition yesterday based on hearsay and zero medical evidence, you didn't just fail to freeze your mother's assets. You triggered the bad faith clause. The what? Nathan squeaked. The bad faith clause, Arthur said, savoring the words. It means that as of 9 a.m. this morning, you have both been removed as trustees. You have no voting power. You have no access. And perhaps most importantly for you too, the clause grants your mother, Chloe Dawson, the sole discretion to suspend all dividend payments to secondary beneficiaries if she deems their actions harmful to the estate. The room went deathly silent. You could hear the refrigerator humming in the kitchen. Emily's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. "You can't cut us off," she whispered, looking at me. "I have a mortgage. Nathan has his car payments. The trust covers those." I picked up the prepaid debit card from the table. I turned it over in my fingers, studying the cheap plastic. "It starts small," I said, echoing Emily's words from the day before. "I'm worried about your spending, Emily. You seem to be hemorrhaging money. Maybe it's best if I limit your exposure." "Mom, please," Nathan said, standing up, panic in his eyes. "We were just trying to help. We didn't mean to." "You meant to control me," I said, my voice rising for the first time. "You meant to make me small. You meant to take the life your father and I built and turn it into your personal piggy bank while I sat here eating canned soup." I looked at the phone. "Arthur, please suspend the monthly dividends for Emily and Nathan effectively immediately, pending a review of their conduct. We can revisit their eligibility in 6 months." "Consider it done, ma'am," Arthur said. "Mom!" Emily screamed, the veneer of the caring daughter completely gone. "You can't do this. That's $3,000 a month. How am I supposed to pay my bills?" I stood up and walked to the door. I opened it wide, letting the bright midday sun flood into the room. "I suggest you get a budget," I said calmly, "and maybe cut back on the frivolous spending. Now get out of my house." They didn't move at first. They were in shock. But the look on my face, a look they had probably never seen before, told them I wasn't bluffing. Nathan walked out first, head hanging low. Emily followed, stopping at the door to glare at me with tears of rage in her eyes. She wanted to say something hurtful, I knew she did. But she looked at me and saw the woman who held the purse strings. She saw the power. And she swallowed her words. She stormed to the car. I watched them drive away. I closed the door and locked it. The silence returned, but this time it didn't feel heavy. It felt liberated. I picked up the phone again. "Are you still there, Arthur?" "I am, Chloe." "Thank you," I said, my voice trembling just a little now that the adrenaline was fading. "Thank you for everything." "Richard would have been proud," Arthur said gently. "Now go get that steak." I drove to the grocery store. The same one. I went to the same checkout line with Brenda. I bought a filet mignon, a bottle of good red wine, fresh asparagus, and a chocolate cake. When I slid my card into the reader, I held my breath for a microsecond. Beep. Approved. I smiled at Brenda. "Have a wonderful day, dear." I went home and cooked a dinner fit for a queen. I ate it alone at the head of the table, raising a glass of wine to the empty chair where Richard used to sit. I missed him terribly. And in a way, I mourned the relationship I thought I had with my children. They were still my kids and I still loved them. But the dynamic had changed forever. They would never look at me as a senile old woman again. They would look at me as the matriarch. And if they wanted back into this family, and back into this trust, they were going to have to earn it. Not with legal threats, but with respect. So to everyone listening, check your paperwork. Know your rights. And never, ever let anyone tell you that you are too old to handle your own life. Sometimes the people claiming to protect you are the ones you need protection from. If you enjoyed this story of justice served cold, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel. Subscribe if you want more stories about family drama and karma coming back around. And drop a comment below. Would you have cut them off completely or would you have given them a second chance? I'll be reading your replies. Thanks for watching and stay sharp out there.